I'll just say that, one of the things of living in San Luis Obispo, where I live, is that it is an incredibly elemental place. I go down to the tide line a few times a week at least to confer with the ocean and remind myself of the forces that dwarf me in space and time. And as for me, I'm a follower of trickster coyotes and a devotee of yellow-billed magpies. The organization I work for, where is the Center for Humans and Nature, and we have a mission to stretch our moral imaginations and to express in art and writing, and now on our farm and the lands that we are stewarding, uh, ways of becoming good relations, ways of becoming kin, and that's what the press is about as well. We're a newly fledged press. So I think Stephen mentioned that the Kinship series, which visual aid here, came out in 2021, in the fall of 2021. And in many ways, the Elementals series is just continuing that conversation. Another 5-volume effort here. And one of the things we do as a press that I think is pretty unique is that we specialize in these kinds of collective projects. And as any of you involved as in publishing or as writers probably know, it's difficult to publish and harder to sell anthologies with multiple authors. But we think that getting people around the table from different geographies, different cultures, different fields of work and walks of life, and asking big questions is really important. So we learn from each other and we're inspired by one another, and that's why we're here tonight. And if you want to go deeper, then I would encourage you to please check out and support our work at humansandnature.org. It's pretty easy to find in your browser. The big question we were asking with this series was the following. What can the elementals, earth, air, fire, water, teach us about being human in a more than human world? So, as with the kinship series, the elemental series is about how we relate and relate well to the non-human, to the more than human. And the elementals, earth, air, water, fire, are these living energies that may be more impersonal than our creaturely relations, our kinship with other forms of life, but thinking about what it means to be in right relation with these elementals is critical. Attending to these elemental forces can ground us deeply in place in the everyday and remind us not only what we're made of and what sustains us, but how these forces connect us across bioregions through the shared vitality of our own vulnerability and creatureliness. So I want to take us back to that big question that we were asking in this series. What can the elementals teach us about being human in a more than human world? And I just want to point out that there are some assumptions built into that question. The first is the fact that it is a question. I mean, because a question indicates a posture of receptivity and a willingness to listen with our whole selves. So by asking what we can be taught, we're also acknowledging that beyond human ways of doing things, that there is a natural law, if you will, consists of biological thresholds and cycles, and that non-human guidance is is offered to us when we're listening, when we're asking that question, how are we to live? So it's up to us, not the elementals, to align ourselves with them, by which I mean adapt to, work with, conspire, perspire, respire together. The elementals shape us, and it's up to us in bodily conversation to turn with them, to feel out and conform to their contours, their regenerative powers. One thing I noted in the introduction to this series is that we're living in a time of extreme pushback, where the feedback we're receiving from the elementals feels like a scream. Most recently in the spark-laden Santa Ana winds near where I live, but also, as was mentioned, Nicole living in Asheville is just in the thick of the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. so much seems to be saying, so much of the elementals seem to be saying, listen, Earth children, listen. And I think that's an elemental invocation for all of us. So I suppose that the other question that we're asking throughout this Earth volume, that we're asking through the elemental series generally, is then how can we incorporate these life-giving forces into our consciousness, into our daily doings, into our eco-social systems and rituals? I would argue that there is a reason that earth, air, water, and fire are part of the fabric of every religion, every expression of spirituality. And that's because they're essential to living. They're essential to our well-being. They're fundamental. They're primary to our existence and our possible flourishing. And when we heed them and work with them and care for them, that flourishing is possible. So part of the impetus of this series was to invite us into a more intentional, deliberate, and care-filled relationship with earth, air, fire, and water. Today we talk earth, and I can't wait to hear from the incredible writers and poets and activists and artists and earth keepers and earth carers about the variety of ways we can answer that question. What can the earth teach us? So with that, I'd like to turn things over to one of the co-editors of the Earth volume. That is Hannah Eisler Burnett. Hannah, if you would take it from here.
Thanks, Gavin. It's good to be here. I'm coming to you from Queens in New York City, which are the stolen lands of the Lenape, the Matinecock, and many others, as well as the diasporic home of lots of people, both by force and by choice, who continue to make community with each other here and reckon with history in the present every day. So, hello from New York. Earth. I'm not gonna I will not speak as long as Gavin did. I was planning remarks with my co-editor who couldn't be here tonight, unfortunately. But I will say a few things. First, interestingly, I think that the Earth volume in particular pushes against a little in a fun and exciting way, a little bit what Gavin just proposed, which is that the elements could be separable at all. What that is to say that what was surprising and exciting and a little tricky in the context of this series and in editing this particular volume is that almost every one of our essays could have also been in another volume. We have an essay about heat that's also a little bit about fire. We have essays about water, about processes that happen at the edge of continents, about sort of deep time histories that pull the elements all together into conversation with each other, and that hold them all together and that grapple with that. And that was beautiful and exciting and also a little strange. And I think that comes from the fact that, as we know, Earth may be the soil, that it's also a place. It is a planet. It is an ecosystem. It is a moment in also maybe the history of our planet that holds life together. And it was just so interesting and wild to balance all of those multiple meanings of Earth in in editing these essays and sort of thinking about how they fit together for this volume. I guess one other thing I would say is that as with the other volumes in this series, ours grapples with both pain and joy. And it does it maybe in a slightly different way, insofar as place and substance are held together by the word earth, by what it, conjures for us. There's so much joy in specific relations and in, I don't know, reading the landscape for a kind of history, holding that history within ourselves and within our relationships with family, with extended kin, and at the same time, an awareness of the ways in which there's planetary change that is really sort of shaking and shattering exactly those histories, those relationships that are so joyful. And so I think that, this volume really, it holds all of that together. And I'm so happy to be here to talk about those themes, to do a little bit of reading and to just talk more about all of that with you. So thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. So what we're going to do tonight, as far as sharing some of this Earth volume with you, is that each of the people that you see here is going to read an excerpt from either the essay or the poem that they contributed to this volume, and they're going to keep it pretty brief. They'll introduce themselves first, maybe provide whatever context might be needed to set up the piece, but really we would just want to hear these words. One of the beauties of of writing that I found in my life is hearing when the words are animated, when they come alive, and that's one of the things I loved about the kinship sessions for these that we held last time around with Point Reyes Books, and I'm sure that that's what's going to be the most memorable part for me in these sessions that we have together with elementals. So what we like to call this is a river of words, and we're just going to flow from one contributor to the next, and then we're going to have probably some questions that Hannah might have for our contributors, but then we really want to encourage you as audience members to put questions that you have as things come up, as you hear the words and as we go along here. Any question that you might have, put it in the Q&A that is available to you at the bottom of your screen. I think there's a nice question mark with Q&A icon. I think that's how it's done. Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong. And we'll be kind of looking at those, and we'll kind of turn things over to that Q&A format after we hear from our contributors. So if I'm not mistaken, Melissa, I think we're beginning with you. Is that, no, beginning with Hannah. Sorry, I just freaked Melissa out. Beginning with Hannah and then moving to Oya and then Letitia and onward. Melissa, you're in the middle somewhere. You know where you are. I'm going to stop talking. Hannah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Hannah again. Hi, everyone. In addition to editing the Earth volume and writing the introduction with Leora Gansworth, who's amazing, I also contributed an essay, as did, yeah, I also contributed an essay. So I'm gonna read from that. It's called A Garden of Earthly Delights, Bearing Fruit in the City. And it's about being a gestational parent in an urban place. Okay. A host of relations. During pregnancy, I craved fruit. That's not surprising. While gestating, a human parent carries much more liquid than at any other time in the life cycle. The quantity of blood flowing through a pregnant person's body increases by 50%, and this is one factor that leads to the specific joy in eating and drinking that some label cravings. Water is sweet, and fruit feels like a gift beyond measure. Hydrating foods were especially delicious to me during this time, and I feasted on watermelon, oranges, and grapes from the grocery store, plums, strawberries, and nectarines from the farmer's market, and cherries from the tree on my corner. As my middle swelled, I was also intensely aware of the fact that my body was transforming these fruits into the flesh of a new being, into the possibility of life. Seeing myself expand with this possibility made it especially evident that the life growing within me would be made out of everything with which I had nourished myself. The food I ate, the water I drank, the air I breathed, and my experiences of stress or ease. In other words, my pregnant body was host to an intersection of earthly entities that were specific to the time and places through which I moved. I've timed myself before to try to keep it at a minute. So there, that's it. I
Oh
think
yeah,
next.
you're
Oh,
on, you're muted. Oh yeah, you have to
You have
unmute.
to unmute.
Okay. Uh-oh. 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 Let me. Hello. Oh, that's awful. Can you pass me by and I'll get this straightened out?
it's actually better now.
Better now.
Oh, so maybe if I just keep moving. What do you mean I'm ready, dear? Okay. Can you live with that? Beautiful. The Soul Garden. Every function of gardening they learned had its own alchemical purpose for their souls. The history of the vegetables we planted, the history of the land we visited, and the land we planted on, the benefits of growing one's own food, the types of watering sources of planting beds, and climate lent themselves to the stories I would tell about their lives. They were required to take notes, and after listening to lectures, viewing films, or listening to music, we would engage in robust conversation. Nearly all of the information was new to them. They were very curious about the subject matter and asked interesting and oftentimes humorous questions. For example, they asked about the difference between soil and dirt. I told them soil is what dirt wishes it was, enlivened by its friends and family, that is, nutrients and microbes, useful insects, organic matter, even manure. Because we all have to deal with some BS sometimes, and it's what we do with it that makes all the difference. Soil shows us what to do with the cards we get dealt in life. In many ways, Black youth are treated as if they are the depleted version of real young people to provide the compost for the souls of these young men. In that moment, I felt as if I had opened a locked door and found a hidden treasure. I am the compost. I help give them access to the earth in a way they never imagined. I can show them the mystery and magic of the garden. Okay.
Oya, do you want to just say one word or two, a word or a sentence or two about who those people are that you're describing? I mean, that's the South Side of Chicago, right?
Yes, this is the South Side of Chicago in the Inglewood community, and that group was a group of young men and young women that my children had grown up with, and I had grown up with their mothers. And when one of the mothers died, the young men just looked untethered. And so it came to me to do something with the soil to help them understand. And so we got a grant and we built a garden and we called it the Soul Garden. It's the Ancestral Mothers of the Hood is the title of my story because it was the mothers and the grandmothers that really came through me to teach them how to survive being that weed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
What's going to Horado Sewagwego, Letitia McNaughton, New Young Yats. I'm going to share a little bit about my essay, Layers of the Turtle Shell. Yawagoa, especially, thank you, especially to Hannah and Leora and Gavin for organizing this volume, and also for my co-contributors. Thousands of years from now, what history and knowledge will the stones hold in their layers about us? What kind of individual and collective imprints are we leaving as humans in the greater geological and historical record? How can we carry good stewardship and good minds in our responsibility as human beings here and now? How do we restore our relationship with the earth and the lands and walk upon the rocks with care? The landscape of the Niagara Escarpment has also been an especially meaningful way for me to connect with ancestral knowledge and to access healing. Roaming the regional terrain of the deep Carolinian forest, foggy meadows, steep earthen paths, and winding riverbanks were my medicine. I later came to appreciate my father's geology lessons, how they helped me to understand my place as being a human within the world and all of its creations. To me, being Ongwahonwe, a real person, a human, means holding a deep kinship and responsibility to the earth and understanding the ways in which the land provides all that we need to survive. So every year in late winter, probably close to this time of year, I return to my seed collection and begin planning my garden for the next growing season. Sorting through strains of corn, beans, tomatoes, sunflowers, I select seeds. Watching them sprout and grow in little containers in the cold, dark basement brings me hope. I think about the ancestors who attended to these seeds and made it possible for us to continue to grow them. People who migrated and carried seeds with them along their migration journey. They knew how to preserve our foodways and to plan for food security for future generations. They knew that our seeds and foods represent hope. Save seeds means to harness responsibility and to invest in a future. So what brings some solace and hope is the seeds and an ongoing connection to our traditional foods and their transformative capacities. As long as we continue to grow, to learn, to share, teach, and continue our traditions, these are ways that we can retain our power. It's difficult, surreal, and often intimidating to accept, but eventually we may come to realize that we are the future elders in the making. We are future ancestors in a long lineage. By acknowledging this responsibility, we start to heal and create a better future. To provide a little bit of context to this piece, I had spent some time earlier in the essay talking about some of the geography and history about the land and the landscape, Haudenosaunee territory, where I grew up in Western New York, and how that shaped my sense of responsibility as a human, and also connected to my cultural ways, and tied that into some of the challenges that we see facing in our earth today, with the climate crises and things that are happening, and tying to the cultural teachings from my community. Nyawa, hope you get the chance to read, and looking forward to hearing more of your pieces.
Jane Slade is up next, I think. Thank you so much, Letitia.
So I'm Jane Slade. I'm an advocate for natural darkness and have always been in my heart for wildlife. And through that, I became kind of an accidental writer and poet. because that was the best way to try and make for change. And thank you to Gavin, Hannah, and Leora so much for all that you've done to bring all of these voices together. And I'm so excited to finally see faces of my fellow contributors. So tonight I'll read from my essay, Rescuing Darkness. The story of the mourning doves told me was a gift of the highest order, given with no expectation of return, with no expectation that I would even notice. Wildlife is all around us, breathing lessons of connection and understanding, and yet we hardly realize it. We have forgotten to witness these parts of ourselves that are still wild too. Yet what they taught me was a path back to these untamed places, to the parts of me that live by the light of the sun and the moon, to the parts of me that fight for survival, if only to love, to these same parts of all living things. While birds around the world are telling us that we must rescue darkness through heartbreaking loss of life, in my own life I awaken to the cooing of mourning doves telling the wordless story of their lives, of fellow earthlings daring not just to live, but to thrive in this wild world. There are natural guides all around us if we are willing to listen. The experience of night is rich with the most precious moments of our lives, from breaking bread with our loved ones to tucking our children into bed. To revel in the darkness of the night is to be fully alive, to pursue not just happiness, but also what it means to fully live out a human life. It's not that we are unable to see in darkness. It's that darkness is for another way of seeing altogether. When the lights go out, our forms soften, and we share some of the most vulnerable and meaningful parts of ourselves with one another. When we can no longer see our own bodies, natural darkness makes it possible to return to the place of our ineffable existence. There is a place within that is only yours, where the light always shines. I know this because I have come to this place through two different doorways, through the darkness that comes with living in a mortal body that loves, is left, and leaves, and through the darkness that occurs each night on this planet, and the experience this creates by blurring the boundary of my body altogether. In darkness, you can erase the self and begin again when the light comes. Each night, this journey is possible.
Thank you so much. Melissa, I think you're up.
Thank you. And I also just want to thank Gavin and Hannah and Leora and also the poetry editors, Nicole and Craig. And I will read my poem. Border Crossing, Kentucky. The light on your hills is a sadness that lowers into dusk. I do not speak your language, nor have I trained my ear not to miss you. I've known your ghosts, lived next to strangers, watched the old man and his mules tend to slowness in the landscape, heard tell, made do, broke something trying to fix it. I've seen the mountain blown clear off to make some kind of progress out of nothing. Been as flat inside as a landscape after the rush for coal. Watched the water turn brown and the snakes come up. Lurked a while in the whippoorwill dark, clinging to every sound.
Beautiful, thank you. Danielle.
Hi, my name is Danielle Joyner. I am a medieval art historian and I teach at a little liberal arts college in Wisconsin. And so, as most art historians do, we much prefer that you look at images than at us. So, I will be showing you things as I jump around through my chapter, The Medieval, the Modern, and the Mundane. Medieval refers to the European Middle Ages, that poorly named millennium between the fall of the Roman Empire, 450, and the gradual emergence of what we label as early modernity, that is the Renaissance around 1450. I contend that these long ago centuries offer fascinating comparisons that enrich how we think about our own actions and contextualize some of the pressing issues of our time. I use modern more loosely to refer to activities that I enjoy, and I use the term mundane in light of its Latin root, mundus, to mean the world, or more specifically, the earth beneath our feet. Oh, there we go. In the town of Le Puy in Valais, a narrow basalt volcanic neck rises 272 feet from the valley floor. On June 18th, 961, Deacon Truanus received permission from the Bishop of Le Puy to build a chapel dedicated to the Archangel Michael on the peak of this steep, needle-like neck. In the 6th century or early 7th century, a Christian pilgrim visiting Jerusalem and the Holy Land picked up stones, sticks, and other earthen bits from sites associated with significant events in Christ's life. Then they set it into hardened sand, a bedding of hardened sand, and put it in a box with paintings on the lid, and they still survive in the Lateran Palace in Rome today. A variation on those sticks and stone relics are the earthen tokens obtained by pilgrims to the shrine of Saint Simeon the Stylite near modern-day Aleppo in Syria. Simeon was very cool and kind of crazy. But ultimately, what can be learned from these medieval and modern reactions to the mundane? I'm going to leave this as a cliffhanger and encourage you to buy the book so you can find out. Thank you.
I think I'm next. I'm Liam Heenahan. I teach at a university in Chicago, DePaul University. So I'm very grateful for this wonderful company tonight, but also in the volume. And grateful, of course, to my editors for this piece. So let me just very briefly mention what I think this essay was about. It was I kind of wrote it. I think it was just right after my dad, Paddy Heenahan, died. So I guess the grief associated with that was pretty fresh. I was also writing a book. Had started writing a book on the concept of decay called Falling Apart. So kind of writing this essay on my father's, I guess, death and dissolution was very on the nose. So part of the challenge was to write a essay that was going to honor him, but maybe more importantly to me, to write an essay that was going to entertain him in a way, which I think was a much taller order. So I guess at some point I'll find out whether he was entertained by it. So I'm just going to read a few paragraphs from the beginning, which is a section of the essay called Earth to Earth. Before my father's final illness, I had not understood that when the call goes out to assemble family members dolefully about a deathbed, it's because a decision has been made to let the loved one pass. The timer is set, the sound is trickling down. Death, that omnipresent possibility at the best of time, becomes calculable when sustenance is withheld. Paddy Heenahan, born in Tralee, Ireland, on the 29th of March, 1927, lived 95 years and though defying predictions by lingering beyond his appointed hour, is now, by all reasonable standards used to determine such matters, dead. Years before this, a stroke had left my father alive but greatly diminished. At the village coffee shop, my mother and I drank our cappuccinos and ate our Bakewell tarts, and I said, it may not seem so yet, but this family has already fallen apart. Later, Dad would tell me stories, each one polished smooth as a pebble caught in the endless tide. Everything unnecessary is rubbed away. Often it is the same old story told in the same way. The waves don't tire of the same old moon, the same path along the shore. My father was not a man for grasping hands. His expressions of affection took other forms. One morning, after a night of childhood terrors drove me to my parents' room, I rose to leave the comforts of their bed when my father stirred. His sleeping hand fell across me. I studied it as if it were a stunning natural marvel, which I suppose every father's hand is. As he lay in his casket, I took his hand for the last time. It was so cold. I'd never before known how cold is the lifeless air. Thank you.
Wow, Liam, it's good to hear you read a bit of that. That essay, by the way, guys, is astounding. So my name is Nicole, and I was actually the poetry co-editor with Craig Santos Perez on these volumes, which was such a blessing. You know, in this particular volume, we've got Rita Dove and Franny Choi, Alexis Pauline Gumbs. And Hannah, you're absolutely right in that that question of thinking about the elements and can they be separable is one of those things that happened. And not only can the elements themselves not be separable, but we cannot be separate from them, nor can our animal kin. And it's very interesting in how these volumes both stand alone, but also sort of sing together in both poetry and prose. You know, one of the things that I have just experienced here, we had Hurricane Helene came through on September 27th. And what's really interesting is that, yes, it was categorized as a storm that brought in 3 trillion gallons worth of water, or 23 trillion gallons worth of water. But it's been categorized as a geological event. What caused the most damage here in the mountains was that literally the earth moved. I have a friend of mine here. He not only lost his house and his car, but he actually lost the earth on which his house sat because it was washed away to the bedrock. And Gavin, you know, when you say that the elements are screaming at us, you know, listen, my children, listen, they are talking to us, all of them. I'm going to read just a little 1-minute segment of a poem that I have in the Earth volume. I'm going to read the first 3 stanzas and the last. And because when I was thinking of Earth, well, I work at a farm sanctuary, so I thought of poo, because that's what I scoop a lot of at the farm. This is called The Scat of It. The shit of it, the slick of it, the beetles tumbling joy, the bear's berry slush of it, the coyote's ghost white dry of it, undigested fur, nothing more, hot pressed into a turd, that nothing wasted prayer. The shame of it, even the dog shy peering from behind a bush, spine curved into the not in my yard sign. The teasing too, me laughing about the anal express, the poor cat hissing at the vet's gloved hand. the dump and log slop of it, a sad jaundiced yellow or something rich, a deposit of iron, green, nearly black, the color of a forest never once cut, miraculously untouched. The satisfaction of it, the full belly, the I did my job, now let go, as in what the earth has given, my cells have loved to death, and now give back what's left, a cramp of thank you. Here is my offering, a stench maybe for us, but for everything else, a bouquet of gratitude. A scattering that if you look close, you can track, at least until it's finally buried in, whipping with worms, churned in, folded back. There is no shame in it, and if we are disgusted, we have not yet learned. Blessed is that from what we came, blessed to what we return.
Natasuis tia paknet, no tomas masipia ka natai masipia. My name's Tia Pocknet. I work with the Weedemoose School, the Mashpee Wampanoag Language and Culture School, located on Cape Cod. And the name of my essay was We Walk This Earth. When I was a little girl, I remember hearing creation stories that described how the land was created. One of our traditional characters from our story was Mashop. Mashop was a giant who traveled all across Turtle Island. He dragged his foot with sand out into the sea, forming what we know now as Cape Cod. When he was finished, Mashop sat upon the beach, tired. He took off one moccasin and poured out the sand from it, and it fell upon the earth. The sand became the island of Martha's Vineyard. He then took off his other moccasin and tossed it into the sea as if to say he was done walking. And when his moccasin landed in the water, it became the island of Nantucket. Mashop grabbed his pipe and then smoked it, giving thanks to Creator. Now, whenever we see fog at Nantucket Sound, we are reminded that the formation of the land, and we know Mashop is smoking his pipe in ceremony, giving thanks to Creator. This is the story that we continue to pass down to each generation. Children look at the land formations on a map and can point out the islands that look like his moccasins, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. When the weather is warm, we bring the children to the beach so they can see the island at low tide, as it is the most visible then, and consider whether this was the beach where Mashop sat. It is of great importance to bring the children to these areas so that they can begin to understand a deeper spiritual connection to the land. Maybe envision the land vacant. Having the students try to visualize the land without these homes breaks down these structures of colonization and calls upon the student to think about a scenario of what if? What if we weren't colonized? What if we still lived in our traditional homes? What if we still spoke our language? What if we moved upon the land and waterways like our ancestors? Another story I love to share is the formation of Scargo Lake. So yeah, that's a little bit of my essay. I work with children ages 3 through 9, and we travel upon the land. We continue to pass down our traditional creation stories, and as we're talking about these stories, we're visiting these land sites. Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. Katapatanmo.
Hi, my name's Antonia Melchick. I am actually in the air volume. Well, my essay is in the air volume. I'm in Northwest Montana. But the date of the air volume book club conflicts with another talk I'm giving. So Gavin was kind enough to let me join some of the other elements. But I really appreciated what Hannah said at the beginning because I struggled a lot with this essay, and it was mainly because I thought if I'd been given any other of the elements to write in, I felt like I could have written it much more naturally. Air felt very amorphous, but I just having read the volumes and now listening to all of you, I really appreciate how connected all of it is, and we can't disconnect it. So my essay was called Trespassing, and it takes place near where I live in Northwest Montana and relates to most of the writing I do now, which is about rethinking private ownership and particularly private land ownership, and really trying to rethink what we mean when we talk about trespass. So I'll just read from the opening of it. It was late September, and the aspen trees were just beginning to yellow. They grew thick on the hillside, a broad grove giving way to small meadows that sloped upward, transitioning after less than a mile to heavy stands of spruce and pine. The group I was with rambled along an old logging road just south of the eastern side of Glacier National Park, while a biologist among us talked about the ecotone we were walking through, a mingling of prairie and forest that stretched all down along the Rocky Mountain front, the eastern-facing slope of the Rockies, where the mountains spill onto the prairie. A light wind blew constantly. As we left the aspens and walked into evergreens, the wind became a whispering, citharism, a sound that's like a rustle and a shush at the same time. That sound characterized almost my entire Montana childhood, but I never consciously noticed it until a few years ago, shortly after moving back to my hometown. One day, a few months into my return, I was walking home through town and stopped to listen to the wind blowing through a stand of tall lodgepole pines bordering the path. That sound, I thought, remembering its company in the Rockies on many a family hike that I had dragged my feet on as a child, and later on treks as a teenager with friends. That sound is home.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. It's also, yeah, I think it just complements uh, what everyone read from Earth. So I would never have known. Um, um, I think that Stephen has said that if anyone in the audience has questions, I can't see the Q&A. So if anyone in the audience has questions and they put them in the Q&A feature or in the chat, they will be passed on to me, and I will read them out. So I'm going to give a few seconds for that to maybe happen. I know we're running a little short on time. I'll ask my kickoff question while we wait to see if there are any questions from the audience, which is, so this is a question for all of you. I thought of a few questions to ask to everyone, and if you feel inspired to answer, please do. And this question is about the writing process for your piece for this book or for the series, Antonia. But did your writing process change the way you think of what Earth is, or your relationship to the Earth, as an elemental force, as Gavin was sort of framing it? Was there something that changed for you in the process of reflecting on the idea of Earth? And Antonia, if you want to answer the question, you want to think about air, that's also totally fine. But yeah, so that's my question for everyone here.
I'll just say that when Leora had contacted me, and when I was working on another project, and I got the submission or the details of how to submit, and I said to my writing coach, I was like, how could I say no to this beautiful lens that you created with the call for submissions? So I found it incredibly inspiring. And so my process was very accidental. In fact, there was a day where I had been paying attention to these mourning doves for about 2 years. And I realized that that was the essay, which was actually very relieving because, Antonia, I do know what it's like when you're like, what do I do? Because that happens too. It's like, it was very lucky when those two ideas kind of met, maybe accidental, but it was a very natural meeting of kind of telling the story of the Mourning Doves with the lens of your call for submissions. So it was a truly inspiring process, and I loved the what that provoked within me. So I have to give a lot of credit to your initial outreach.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that? I can actually see the Q&A now. I don't know why I couldn't before. Um,
Yeah, I would add something in that. I think that in seeing the whole project together, I began to truly get a sense of the agency and animacy of each of the elements, how they operate, what they're made of, what it is they do, and then also how each of them are so gorgeously necessary for life, but taken out of balance, how harmful they can be. And it was very interesting for me to sort of see the cast of characters, so to speak, in terms of the elements, and love and respect them for who they are.
I'm gonna jump in there because I think it relates to this to a question that we got in the Q&A, which is actually sort of a question for us editors, I think, asking about the alchemy that happened as the pieces came together and how the elements play together. What was unexpected or magical in pulling the pieces of this collection together? And I kind of want to, I'm going to just jump in for a second and say that one of the things that I thought was really amazing, we didn't have, so because the poetry editors were working sort of separately from the editors of each volume, or at least of this volume. And so we sort of got this set of amazing, like, poems that uh, for me, like each of these poems in this volume sort of like altered, like shifted something inside me, right? And then we had to think again about how we were going to order the essays in relation to these sort of, more spare, but like incredibly meaningful sort of pivots, I guess. I was sort of thinking of them as pivots in the text. And that was playful and surprising for me and fun to imagine. But I am sure that Nicole and maybe Gavin had more to say about how these things came together.
Well, to use the line from Nicole's poem as a bouquet of gratitude, the way that I love you have these individual pieces, right? And they stand alone on their own. And one of the things about the Earth volume and the other volumes, and I think that you probably, as a listener, hopefully got some appreciation for tonight, are the diversity of ways to approach that idea of Earth. You can talk about soil, soul gardens, and decay and death and the night. I mean, what an interesting way to approach to think of Earth in its celestial, incarnation. So the one beautiful thing that happens, the sort of alchemy that happens, is instead of just getting one person's specific perspective and argument for what Earth is and what we can do and that sort of thing, you get this incredible collage um, of styles and subject matter that really, I think, amplifies each of the pieces when they're together. in a wonderful way. So I guess that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, I don't know how many of you out there in listener land have seen the covers of these books. They're absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, Hannah's got a good eye on it there. They're like these kaleidoscopic fractal echoes of these images coming back and forth. And it is what in theory could just be a mess, but ordered in the right way and centered around the same thing makes this beautiful radial collage. And I think that that's how I felt like the manuscripts came together, where you didn't exactly think that they were going to fit, but they both held hands and pushed on each other just enough to create something with a lot of energy, where the pieces are neither in agreement with one another, but at the same time augment each other. And that was quite refreshing and interesting. And I think that from the diversity of perspectives and voices and forms that were there, that the anthologies really offer up something very unique.
Something that I thought about so much while I was writing was who all of you were, and that we were all co-creating without even having met each other. And so it was just, for me, that's what I thought about so much, that we were all making something together, bound by that call to create something that hadn't happened yet, but sort of that we were connected across space and time because it was being made. So it was sort of already made. And so I just thought about that co-creation with all of these voices and what it was to become a lot while I was writing.
This might be partly an answer to Heather Swan's question also about connecting more deeply to elements in the earth. My first book was about walking, and now I write about a lot about the commons and private property, and how theft of the commons tears us apart. And when Dagan Miller first, the editor of the Air volume, first got in touch with me about this, I partly struggled with it because of the air topic, but also because it felt like what I'd been waiting for people to talk about on a wider scale, a wide variety of people to talk about on a wider scale, just like how do we relate to all the different elements among us. And when I wrote my book about walking, it was a lot about air pollution and being in a body, an involved animal body on this planet. And it felt like this incredible opportunity to write about, I guess, the deepest, not just themes, but the deepest thoughts and feelings and that I have about connecting to the world that came from researching and writing about walking and doing a lot of walking while I was at it. And during the time that I wrote this essay, I started walking barefoot a lot where I live, and it's kind of weird. But I do it a ton, and I don't strongly recommend it. It depends on where you live and what your comfort level is. But I have found that putting my feet in running water and walking barefoot has been connecting me to things in ways I didn't expect. And it partly came out of writing this, because the place I started doing that was the place where my essay is located and where I've spent a lot of time and feel very connected to.
Thank you. Since you referenced it, I'm gonna jump to Heather's question, and unfortunately, it's gonna be the last question. There's actually a few really wonderful questions that have come in that we won't be able to get to, which I'm sorry about. I hope that you'll all come back to the next book club, which is, I hope that Stephen or Gavin will put in the chat the date. It's in February, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. Um, thanks for all the amazing questions. But since Antonia gestured towards it, a question from Heather is, how could we begin to connect more deeply with the elements and specifically with the earth? Are there practices that bring you into connection with the earth? So I'll leave that as our last question, and we'll sort of, yeah. What are your thoughts?
I wonder if I could say something just since Antonia was talking about walking as being this really kind of core practice. I was spent much of the afternoon discussing walking, in the form of hiking, pilgrimage, being a flaneur, being a city kind of, just kind of wanderer with students this afternoon. And it just struck me how difficult they found that notion. I mean, I've got bright, really passionate, enthusiastic students, but they just found it kind of difficult when I suggested that kind of walking as methodology. The walking actually connects you with something deep. And I just don't know whether this is a great response to Heather's interesting question, but it does seem to me that a lot of the resources that we might have for getting back to an elemental life are very kind of core, mundane, to use that word that's cropped up. And it's just a matter of kind of encouraging people to really think about how very ordinary practices can connected us with kind of very deep forces of the earth. So I guess that's all I want to say about that.
I'll jump in. Hi, Heather. I have to credit this idea to Gary Nabhan. It's Nabhan. I studied with him once as part of an Ecology of the Spirit retreat, and there was a Christian theology under it, but instead of taking the traditional communion, Gary passed around a basket of dirt and told everyone to take a pinch of it and to eat it. And I've actually used that in more than one class, and I think it's quite interesting, right? Because you are taught that that's something that should never, you should never put that in your mouth, or, it's dirty, it's dirt. But to think of it as something that is sacred, that you are made of and that you put into your body in this transformative way, was a really interesting ritual for me that you should try.